Hello, Genpo. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I do have a question along the lines. I have the privilege of working with Andrew on the magazine, and so we've talked about these issues a lot. And I'd be curious in terms of how you see your own, because you're part of the first generation of American Buddhist teachers, teachers who were trained by Eastern masters. Right. And the first generation of American spiritual teachers, and in this case, American Buddhist spiritual teachers. I'm curious how you see your own role as an authority figure, how it's similar and different from what you experienced in your own teacher, in Maezumi Roshi, and so the difference in how you're understanding hierarchy with your own students and how he understood it with you.
Excellent question, well thought out. No, very good question. Obviously, there are differences, that's for sure, and there are probably similarities also. Okay, for my teacher, the role of teacher was always teacher, and once in a while, because I was very close to Maezumi Roshi over a period of 24 years, once in a while that dropped, and we had a more or less very intimate connection, usually relaxed, very often traveling, most of the time here in Europe, not here in Europe, but over in Europe. I think I'm in Europe right now, I'm so far from Salt Lake. And it was a very intimate experience, but most of the time there was always the vertical hierarchical relationship, and it rarely deviated at all, okay? His big complaint about me back in the late 70s when I began teaching, 78, was he felt that I was too friendly with my students, too close, yeah, and I didn't adhere enough to that vertical. And I was telling Andrew, actually just today, that I had moved to Amsterdam with my wife and young child of 2 years in 1984. And in 1980, I think it was 84, he came and he had me move to England. And it was because the Dutch were too horizontal with me, and too friendly, and there wasn't enough respect.
It'd be good if you tell them the story of what happened.
All right, so I'll tell the story. So we've just finished a big retreat, right, 7-day retreat, and there was a party. And the party was at Nico Tiedemann's house. And Nico Tiedemann is a successor of mine now, but this was back in 1984. He became a successor 20 years later. And he'd already been studying with Suzuki Roshi since the 60s, and Baker Roshi and so forth. And he was a teacher there in his own right. And so there was this party in his apartment, and they had a gift for Maezumi Roshi. And so he came up to Maezumi Roshi and he slaps him on the back and he says, "Maezumi, we've got a gift for you." And Maezumi said, "You move." That evening, he told me, I had to move. I had to leave Holland and move to England. Yeah. For me, and it may be very different than how Andrew does it, but for me, I see the vertical as extremely important. I see the horizontal as also important. And I also see that it's really dynamic when I can have a relationship with a student that me on top and them here, and we can reverse it sometimes, and also here. So I like that dynamic, but that's been his complaint, Maezumi Roshi's complaint about me. I love that dynamic. So I don't like always being in that role for me personally, and I like moving it around. And in Zen it's the swastika, but it's reverse, right? It's in some of the secret documents, and the rotation of swastika is that movement of vertical and horizontal, and when you spin that, that's the dynamics. So I like that kind of relationship, and I feel it keeps the relationship very alive and very real.
But again, don't you think that for us, for those of us who are trying to maintain this whole notion of hierarchy and verticality in a postmodern context, and hopefully in a postmodern context, that what you described is exactly what we have to negotiate. So in other words, in a traditional hierarchy, the hierarchy is rigid and it's ever unchanging.
Right.
But because we're now in a postmodern context, it's inevitable that we're going to have relationships with students in which the hierarchy in the relationship is going to have to become flexible. And so one of the things that, that I've been trying to pioneer and work with is a context where hierarchy is the foundation, and it's always respected, but also there's a flexibility, because, I mean,
I think that's the key word.
We were just having a conversation downstairs, and I said, well, I know what I know and also know what I don't know.
Right.
And also, we also know more about what it means to be a human being. And so, naturally, because of our background, we want to share more of our humanity with people that we're close to in the context of a hierarchical relationship. But we don't want the hierarchical relationship to suppress or inhibit anybody else's autonomy.
Right.
So we want to also know how to be friends. But that's new territory. This is new.
Well, I think that was the basis of the question, right?
Definitely, yeah. This is what
really I'm saying,
territory.
I think, is exactly what you're saying, that's kind of where we're at right now, and it's what we're exploring, what we're developing, what we're pioneering. And it's a whole new thing.